Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Yes, national security took centre stage on Sunday as two former spy chiefs waded in for the Remain side. Jonathan Evans and John Sawyers said counter-terrorism was a team game. But the Justice Secretary Michael Gove said they were flat wrong and that the UK could take immediate steps to boost national security after a Leave vote. The Prime Minister raised the stakes on Monday, saying Brexit could lead to war. He said that without Britain in the EU, peace and stability would be under threat. But Boris Johnson hit back, saying it was preposterous to suggest that leaving the EU could trigger World War III. Yesterday, the former Welfare Secretary Ian Duncan-Smith tried to shift the focus onto social justice. He said the EU was a friend of the haves rather than the have-nots. And this morning, the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown described leaving the EU as not British and not in tune with the Churchillian spirit. He was giving a speech in central London.
Britain is not in a position only to be a member of the European Union. Britain is in a position and should be a leader in the European Union. This referendum isn't about anything. It's about what kind of Britain we are and what kind of Britain we aspire to become. We should be a leader in Europe, not simply a member. We should not be fully out and we should not be half out. We should be fully in. We should recognise that the world has changed since the first referendum, and we should be the advocates of cooperation in an interdependent world. Thank you very much.
Gordon Brown speaking of the London School of Economics. Hilary Benn, Gordon Brown took Labour to one of its worst defeats in modern times. He's distinctly less popular south of the border than he is north of the border. Is he an asset for the Remain campaign?
He certainly is. I mean, look at the case he's just made. This notion that we are being having to listen to from the Leave campaign, that somehow we are put upon in Europe, we're locked in a boot, that we have no influence, is a nonsense. I think everybody knows it is a nonsense.
So in the 3 years that he was Prime Minister, in what way did we lead Europe?
We have always played a leading part in Europe. I mean, take his time as Chancellor and the part that Europe played in agreeing new commitments on aid and debt relief in the run-up to the Gleneagle Summit, in which he and Tony Blair played such an important part. That is leadership that helps to unlock change.
But when he
in the
was
rest
Prime
of the
Minister,
world.
in what way did Britain...
Well, on climate change.
But everybody was in favour of that.
Well, no. Which was the first country in the world, Andrew, to put climate change legislation on its statute book? It was.
Right, but we did that.
It was the British government under...
But we did that as an individual country, not as a member of the European Union. The European Union is unanimous in its attitude to climate change.
You were asking a question about the influence we then had. The fact is the leadership that Britain gave, including during the time that Gordon was Prime Minister, on climate change, did have an impact on other countries.
So the European Union would not have...
fruit of all of that.
The European Union would not have agreed to climate change if it hadn't been for Britain.
No, I'm not saying that. But the argument that I am making and Gordon is making, we are in this campaign, just if you let me answer the question, is this. Being in the European Union helps us to manage the great challenges that we are facing in the world, whether it is climate change or the refugee crisis or tackling poverty.
Right.
And to leave would be to deny us that means, and we shouldn't be turning our face away from a really important partnership with our immediate neighbours.
In what way have we led on the refugee crisis?
Europe has had a difficult time on the refugee crisis, and the British government, the Conservative government, has certainly not led on the refugee crisis, because the Prime Minister's had to be pushed at every single stage. Before that awful picture of Aylan Kurdi appeared on the front page of our newspapers, he had said, we've done enough for Syria, we're not going to do any more.
How should we have led?
The answer is that it's European countries working together. He should have agreed to take more refugees before he eventually changed his mind. He shouldn't have had to be battered, as it happened in the last couple of weeks, into agreeing to take unaccompanied child refugees who have made their way into Europe. So there's been a failure of leadership on the part of the Conservative government, but at least we have an institution that is trying to grapple with what you would recognise is a really difficult and challenging
problem. Are you
problem.
worried that, given Mr Corbyn's lukewarm attitude to Remain, that there's a problem in getting the Labour vote out for Remain, and that's why Mr. Brown could be important.
We're all now making the argument. The local elections are out of the way. The Labour Party is focused now on one thing and one thing only, which is winning this referendum on the 23rd of June. We have a very distinct message that we are bringing, because Europe has helped to support workers' rights, improvements in the environment, and we cannot, as Gordon said today, the idea that the British way is somehow to turn our back on the European Union. Right. The fact is we are an influential and powerful nation.
But I was asking you about the Labour vote, because the Remain cannot win without the Labour vote coming out in substantial numbers, because it looks as if the Conservative vote is going to split 55, 45, 60, 40 for Leave. So you need that Labour vote, agreed?
Indeed, we do in that Labour vote. And we have a united Labour Party, Jeremy, right, the whole of the shadow cabinet, the vast majority of the PLP, the major unions, and we're taking a distinct Labour message as to why it's good for jobs, growth and investment and our security and influence.
Well, you mentioned security. John Hayes, we've now had 2 former heads of MI5, 1 former head of MI6, 5 former heads of NATO, 13 former leading figures in the White House, including former secretaries of state, all warning about leaving the UK, all saying that it would be bad for our security. What bit of that message are you not getting?
Well, the former Secretary General of Interpol, as you know, Richard Noble, has taken the opposite view. Richard Dearlove, the
current head of Europol, doesn't take that view.
Is taken that view. So there are all kinds of people who share my view.
Well, that's 2, actually. The overwhelming weight of expertise is against you.
Well, what I say about this is this. Of course, Hillary's right. That many of the problems we face are pan-national. Of course, that's true. And of course, Gordon Brown's right. The world's changed since 1975. But the point is, the world has changed in a way that means we have to reach out well beyond Europe. I just come from a meeting, as it happens, with the head of Interpol. They have a reach to 190 countries. I didn't know there were 190.
But we have that whether we're in or out.
Well, precisely. And
so in what way would we be more? In what way are we more secure by leaving?
I think 2 ways. I think there are issues about how we determine our security policy, and there is a creeping attempt by the European Union to have more say over that. We've resisted that as a government, as a Home Office and as a government. So that is a way in which I feel.
Why would that make us less secure?
Well, because I absolutely believe that our security services, our intelligence services, and successive governments actually have got security policy right. I think we do have the skills and competence to get it right.
So we've got it right as members of the EU.
Yes.
So why change?
Because we've had control of it. Because
we still have
we
control.
In this country determine security policy.
Are you seriously telling me that the French intelligence is going to allow Brussels, of all places, after what's just happened, Brussels to take control of French intelligence?
Well, I can tell you that the European Union has a creeping desire to take more and more control of security policy. And we are resisting that as a government, rightly so.
Give me an example of where it's trying to take more control.
Well, they are developing a pan-European policy view about how security policy should be gauged and implemented.
Well, that's a coordinating job. What's wrong with that?
No, the coordination role is an intergovernmental role, not a supranational role. The whole point about Europe is it wants to do things at a supranational level. We want to do things at intergovernmental level.
But maybe we need more European Union intelligence to complement the national intelligence services.
We certainly need to share intelligence, but that's operational. You know, our intelligence services, our police, well, of course will share information. And is anyone really telling me, I don't think Hillary would say this, that were we to leave the European Union, where it's in the mutual interest of countries, they won't continue to share information. Would the French do that? Would the Germans do that? Of course they wouldn't do it.
I think the problem with your argument, John, is undermined, as Andrew pointed out in asking the question, by the voices of experience, people whose job it has been to keep the nation safe, to keep the country safe, to protect us. And they say this would be bad for our security. And take a practical example. We're not part of the Schengen passport-free arrangement, which shows that we are able to exercise our own judgment on things like that, just as we're not in the euro. But we do participate in sharing information through the Schengen information system. Now, as you all know, almost better than anyone else, that's really important to our security. Why on earth would we want to walk away from arrangements that help to protect us when the voices of people whose day-to-day job it is and has been to protect us say, I really don't think that would be a good idea, John.
But Henry, contrary to the parody that the In campaign like to paint of people who want to leave, I've never said for a moment that we wouldn't need to continue to cooperate, that these things aren't pan-national, we wouldn't share information. What I'm saying to you is, can anyone seriously believe that countries would cease to want to cooperate, share information exactly how you describe if we're outside the EU? Of course they wouldn't, because they want to keep their people safe and they want to keep our people safe.
Well, let's assume that we can continue to share bilaterally, whether we're in or out. But the question for you, Hilary Benn, is what EU intelligence arrangements would we no longer enjoy if we weren't in the EU?
Well, a lot of it would depend on what happens if the nation were to vote to leave. Because for all of these questions, Andrew, the honest answer is we don't know.
No, but what exists among EU intelligence arrangements that we wouldn't enjoy if we left?
Well, would we continue to have access, for example, to the Schengen information system?
Can you just explain to our viewers what information Schengen actually shares?
It shares information on where, as I understand it, where there are warning notices and other information. There's been a big step forward because the EU, hang on.
Interpol and Europol do that too.
But the EU, the Parliament has recently agreed arrangements on sharing of data, which is helping to make passenger name records.
But we can do that already.
Yeah.
We can do.
Passenger name
if you filled in an
available.
ESTA for the United States, you know that happens already for America. We could do that with any country tomorrow that we wanted to.
Well, we could. The question you asked me was, what would change? And the answer is, we don't know what arrangement we put in place. And that is the central weakness of the Leave campaign's argument right across the piece.
But let's just take this passenger database.
Answer the question.
It has been a fact that you have had to share passenger data to go to the United States for quite some time now, and vice versa. There's been a push to get that done in Europe as well, and the European institutions, and particularly the European Parliament, have stopped it. Where does that help us? And it's only now they finally agreed.
As you've just answered the question by pointing out, the European Parliament has now agreed to rules that will enable that data to be shared, and that is a very practical example of how cooperation works.
Well, it took 10 years.
To help our security. It does help our security. The other point I would make to you, John, is you said, we need to be doing things in other parts.
A wider view.
No, a wider view. But the idea that somehow there is this competition, it's either we cooperate in Europe or we cooperate globally. We need to do both.
All right. We need to move on. We need to move on.
It's not introspective. It's an outward-looking view.
We need to move on.
Stop being afraid of the European Union.
We've got another several weeks of this, There's no need to rush it.
How many days?
I can't tell you.
Yes, you can.
This